Good morning. Today I'm going to read to you from Chapter 2 of Deltora Quest. But before I do that, I wanted to remind you that at the beginning of a book, especially in fantasy, we might have some learning moments and we might learn something alongside the character. And that is definitely going to happen today when our main character goes to the library, remember, and he reads about the Belt of Deltora. After hours of searching, Jared finally found a book that he thought might help him. It was covered in faded pale blue cloth, and the gold lettering on the outside had been worn away. But the title inside was still very clear. The Belt of Deltora, the history, its power, and its magic. This book was nothing like the splendid hand-painted volumes that he and Endon read in the schoolroom, and nothing like many other weighty books on the library shelves. It was small, thin, and very dusty. It had been tucked away in the library's darkest corner among piles of papers, as though someone had wanted it to be forgotten. Jared carried the old book carefully to a table. He planned to read it from beginning to end. His task might take him all night, but he did not expect to be disturbed. No one would be looking for him. Endon would go straight from the great hall to the chapel, where his father's body lay surrounded by candles. He would keep watch there alone till dawn, following the rule. Poor Endon, thought Jared. It had only been a few days since he did the same for his mother. Now he's alone in the world as I am, but at least we have each other. We are friends to death, and I will protect him as best I can. Protect him from what? He wondered. The question pierced his mind like a sharp knife. Why had he suddenly begun to fear for Endon? Who or what could threaten the all-powerful king of Deltora? I'm tired, thought Jared. I'm imagining things. He shook his head impatiently and lit a fresh candle to brighten the darkness, but the memory of Prandine's thin smile as he locked the magic belt away kept drifting into his mind like the shadow of a remembered nightmare. He frowned, lowered his head to the book, turned to the first page, and began to read. This is from the Book of Deltora. In ancient days, Deltora was divided into 7 tribes. The tribes fought on their borders, but otherwise stayed in their own place. Each had a gem from deep within the earth, a talisman with special powers. There came a time when the enemy from the Shadowlands cast greedy eyes on Deltora. The tribes were divided, and singly none of them could repel the invader, who began to triumph. A hero called Aiden rose from the ranks of the people. He was an ordinary man, a blacksmith, who made swords and armor and shoes for horses, but he had been blessed with strength, courage, and cleverness. One night, Aiden dreamed of a special and splendid belt, 7 steel medallions beaten to the thinness of silk and connected together with fine chain. To each medallion was fixed one of the tribal gems. Realizing that the dream had been sent to him for a purpose, Aiden worked in secret over many months to create a likeness of the belt he had been shown. Then he traveled around the kingdom to persuade each tribe to allow its talisman to be added to it. The tribes were at first suspicious and wary, but one by one, desperate to save their land, they agreed. As each gem became part of the belt, its tribe grew stronger, but the people kept their strength secret and bided their time. And when at last the belt was complete, Aiden fastened it around his waist, and it flashed like the sun. Then all the tribes united behind him to form a great army, and together they drove the enemy from their land. And so Aiden became the first king of the United Tribes of Deltora, and he ruled the land long and wisely. But he never forgot he was a man of the people, and that their trust in him was the source of his power. Neither did he forget that the enemy, though defeated, was not destroyed. He knew the enemy is clever and sly, and that its anger and envy 1,000 years is like a blink in the eye. So he wore the belt always and never let it out of his sight. Jared read on, and the more he read, the more troubled he became. He had a pencil and some paper in his pocket, but he didn't need to take notes. The words of the book seemed to be burning themselves into his brain. He was learning more than he expected, not just about the belt of Deltora, but about the rule. The first to leave the belt aside was Aiden's grandson, King Elstrad, who in his middle years grew fat with good living, and he found the steel cut badly into his belly. Elstrad's chief advisor soothed his fears, saying the belt need only be worn on great occasions. Elstrad's daughter, Queen Adina, followed her father's way, wearing the belt only 5 times in her reign. Her son, King Brandon, wore it only 3 times, and at last it became the custom for the belt to be worn on only the day that the heir took the throne. At the urging of his chief advisor, King Brandon caused the Rallied builders to raise a great palace on the hill at the center of the city of Del. The royal family moved from the old blacksmith's forge to the palace, and over time it became the custom for them to remain within its walls, where no harm could come to them. When Jared closed the book at last, his heart was heavy. His candle had burned low, and the first dawn light was showing at the window. He sat for a moment thinking, then he slipped the book into his shirt and ran to seek Endon. The chapel was below ground level in a quiet corner of the palace. It was still and cold. The old king's body was lying on a raised marble platform in the center, surrounded by candles. Endon was kneeling beside it, with his head bowed. He looked up as Jared burst in. His eyes were red from weeping. "You should not be here, Jared," he whispered. "It is against the rule." "It is dawn," Jared panted, "and I had to see you." Endon stood up stiffly and came over to him. "What is it?" he asked in a low voice. Jared's head was full of everything he had read. The words came tumbling out of him. "Endon, you should wear the belt of Deltora always, as the ancient kings and queens did." Endon stared at him in puzzlement. "Come," Jared urged, taking his arm. "Let's go and get it now." But Endon held back, shaking his head. "You know I cannot do that, Jared. The rule." Jared stomped his foot with impatience. "Forget the rule. It's just a collection of traditions that have grown up over the years and have been made law by chief advisors. It's dangerous, Endon. Because of it, every new ruler of Deltora has been more powerless than the one before. This must stop with you. You must get the belt and put it on. Then you must come with me outside the palace gates." He was speaking too fast and too wildly. By now, Endon was frowning and backing away from me. "You are ill, my friend," he was whispering nervously. Or you have been dreaming." "No," Jared insisted, following him. "It is you who are living in a dream. You must see how things are outside the palace, in the city and beyond." "I see the city, Jared," argued Endon. "I look out at it from my window every day. It is beautiful." "But you do not talk to the people. You do not walk among them." "Of course I do not. That is forbidden by the rule," Endon gasped. I know that is all as well." "You know nothing except what you are told by Prandine," shouted Jared. "And is that not enough?" The cold voice cut through the air like sharp steel. Startled, Endon and Jared spun around. Prandine was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on Jared, glittered with hatred. "How dare you tempt the king to turn from his duty and the rule, servant boy," he hissed, striding into the chapel. "You have always been jealous of him, and now you seek to destroy him. Traitor!" "No!" exclaimed Jared. He turned again to Endon. "Believe me," he begged. "I have only your good at heart." But Endon shrank away from him, horrified. Jared plunged his hand into his shirt to get the book, to show it to Endon, prove to him that he had good reason for what he said. "Beware, your majesty, he has a knife," shouted Prandine, leaping forward and sweeping Endon under his cloak as if to protect him. He raised his voice to a shriek. "Murderer! Traitor! Guards! Guards!" For a single moment, Jared stood frozen. Then he heard bells of warning ringing. He heard shouts of alarm and heavy feet thudding toward the chapel. He saw Prandine's mocking, triumphant smile. He realized that Prandine had been given the chance he'd been waiting for, the chance to rid himself of Jared for good. Jared knew if he valued his life, he would have to flee. Pushing Prandine aside, he ran like the wind from the chapel, up the stairs to the back of the palace. He plunged into the huge, dim kitchens where the cooks were just beginning to light the fires in the great stoves. Behind him, he could hear the shouts of the guards. "Traitor! Stop him! Stop him!" But the cooks did not try to stop Jared. How could they think he was the one the guards were pursuing? He was the young king's friend. They'd known him all his life. They only watched as Jared tore open the kitchen door and ran outside. The grounds were deserted except for an ragged old man tipping food scraps into a horse-drawn cart. He took notice as Jared plunged under the cover of the thick bushes that grew against the palace walls. Keeping low, Jared crawled through the bushes to the front of the palace. Then he ran, dodging and weaving, till he reached the tree near the gates, where so often he and Endon had hidden from Min in the old days. He crept into the tree's hollow, and he huddled there, panting. He knew the guards would surely find him in the end. Perhaps Endon would even tell them where to look, and when they found him, they would kill him. Of that he had no doubt. He cursed himself for being impatient, for scaring Endon with the wild talk while he was still confused, tired, and grieving, for playing into Prandine's hands. There was a squeaking, rattling sound not far away. Peering cautiously out of his hollow, Jared saw the rubbish cart trundling around the side of the palace, heading for the gates. The old man sat in the front, urging his tired horse on with sad shakes of the reins. Jared's heart leapt. Perhaps there was a chance of escape from the palace after all, but how could he run away, leaving Endon alone and unprotected? He was sure now that Prandine was evil. If you stay, you will die, and then you will never be able to help Endon, never. That thought brought him to his senses. He pulled out his pencil and paper and scrawled a note. He tucked the note into the hole in the tree's trunk, wondering if his friend would ever see it. Perhaps Endon, believing what Prandine said of him, would never come to this place again. But he had done what he could, and the cart was coming closer. Soon it would pass under the tree. That would be his chance. As he had done so many times before, he climbed up through the hollow trunk of the tree and squeezed out of the hole that gaped just above the lowest branch. From here he could see the guards were everywhere, but he was used to hiding. He lay on his stomach, flattening himself against the branch, being careful not to make it sway. The rubbish cart was underneath him now. He waited until just the right moment, then dropped lightly on the back, burrowing quickly into the sticky mess of scraps until he was completely covered. Bread crusts, apple peel, moldy cheese, gnawed bones, and half-eaten cakes pressed against his face. The smell nearly made him choke. He screwed his eyes shut and held his breath.